I'm John Levy, and it is my privilege to continue to serve as the 10th chair of the board of the Legal Services Corporation, and welcome to our forum on increasing access to justice that also will feature at the end a presentation of LSC's Pro Bono Service Awards. We will be privileged to hear remarks from the Chief Justice of Kansas, Marla Lukert, from Kansas United States Senator Jerry Moran, who joins us with specially recorded remarks, and from LSC's President Ron Flagg. President Flagg will also moderate a panel discussion, Creating Opportunity Through Record Sealing, with representatives of Kansas Legal Services and the Access to Justice Lab of Harvard Law School. And we will recognize the exemplary pro bono service provided by 4 distinguished members of the Kansas legal community in the presentation of LSC's Pro Bono Service Awards. Our event today kicks off an LSC week in the heartland. Following our meetings here, our Rural Justice Task Force next week will hold a field hearing in Oklahoma City, as that task force continues its vital efforts to raise awareness about the civil legal needs of rural residents, profile model programs and approaches to providing effective legal services to them, and recommending strategies for engaging private attorneys to serve rural clients. Well, we gather today also on the doorstep of LSC's 50th anniversary in 2024, and just a few months after the release of LSC's very compelling Justice Gap report, which illustrates just how much work remains in order to expand access to our civil justice system for all Americans. Our 2022 Justice Gap study, LSC's second in 5 years, uses updated, improved methodology and provides a fresh assessment of low-income American civil legal needs and the extent to which these needs are met or, more significantly, not met. I'm sure all of you have memorized this, but the study found that low-income Americans do not get any or enough legal help for 92% of their substantial civil legal problems. 92%. Isn't that a staggering number? Well, it's also a huge injustice for low-income Americans and a particularly daunting challenge for the work of LSC and its grantees. And the report found, for example, that the 132 legal organizations funded by LSC, covering the entire nation and U.S. territories, do not have sufficient resources to meet the demand in the communities they serve, turning away half the requests they receive. And even when those grantees can provide some assistance, they only have the resources to fully resolve slightly more than half of those matters. Well, one of the most important factors fueling this crisis is something that I talk about frequently: the chronic underfunding of LSC. In 1994, fiscal year 1994, 28 years ago, Congress appropriated $400 million for LSC. Since then, LSC's appropriation has increased only slightly to $489 million for fiscal year 2022, not remotely enough to keep up with inflation or population growth, much less the increased demand and need for services resulting from the pandemic and economic setbacks that have occurred during the last 3 decades. That's why, for fiscal year 2023, LSC's bipartisan board unanimously, in light of this new Justice Gap study, voted to seek $1.576 billion in funding from Congress for fiscal year 2024. This level of funding is imperative because of the enormous unmet need and because it is required to preserve a basic core value of our country. Is America America without equal justice? As Justice Scalia eloquently put it 8.5 years ago at LSC's 40th anniversary, and I quote the justice, and I can see him in my mind. The American ideal is not for some justice. It is, as the Pledge of Allegiance says, liberty and justice for all, or as the Supreme Court pediment has it, equal justice. I've always thought, the justice said, that's somewhat redundant. Can there be justice if it's not equal? Can there be a just society when some do not have justice? Equality, equal treatment, is perhaps the most fundamental element of justice, unquote. Can we continue to tolerate a society where the promise of America is merely empty rhetoric for millions of our most vulnerable citizens? It won't surprise you then that the study also, in my view, quite alarmingly found that only 28% of low-income Americans believe that people like them are treated fairly in the civil justice system. Well, equal access to justice has defined America from its very beginning. Thomas Jefferson wrote that, and I quote him, "The most sacred of the duties of government is to do equal and impartial justice to all its citizens." And indeed, that duty is listed at the very beginning of our Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. Well, Harry Truman, you all know Harry Truman out here, in his inaugural address in 1949, he could have been speaking to us today as he reminded us that it reminded that generation, the generation in 1949, that, and I quote him, "Each period of our national history has had its special challenges. Those that confront us now are as momentous as any in the past. The American people," President Truman said, "stand firm in the faith which has inspired this nation from the beginning. We believe that all men have a right to equal justice under law." And Kansas native son Dwight Eisenhower, just a few years later, proclaimed that equal justice is a foundational American value when, in 1958, he designated May 1 as Law Day, calling on all Americans to, quote, "vigilantly guard the great heritage of liberty, justice, and equality under law which our forefathers bequeathed to us." So as we approach the 50th anniversary of LSC, it is more important than ever that we keep faith with the foundational values that have shaped our country's democracy since its inception. This is happening on our watch. Harry Truman, the buck stops here. Well, the buck stops with all of us, and it's time we release the bucks to pay for the justice system that we need to have in this country. Thank you very much. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our LSC board member, Matt Keenan. Matt's a longtime partner at Shook, Hardy & Bacon here in Kansas City, where he practiced for more than 3 decades, primarily focusing on defense of pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturers. Throughout his career, Matt has maintained an active pro bono docket. He served on the board of Legal Aid of Western Missouri. He's chaired Shook's pro bono committee. The Shook Law Firm is committed to various pro bono initiatives and annually donates 25,000 plus hours of Legal Services. Matt also annually participates in Kansas's pro bono Stand Down for Veterans event to assist veterans with legal services and other unmet needs. His BA and JD, he's a Jayhawk boy. And I'll tell you, but he clerked for the Honorable James Logan on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Please join me in welcoming our friend Matt Keenan.
I have enjoyed visiting with lots of old friends that I've seen today. Jeff Jordan was on the law review with me at KU, and Tony Rupp was a high school debate opponent from Thomas More Prep. Justice Lukert is here, of course, and we're going to honor her in a little bit. But it's great to have the LSC board have its quarterly meeting in Kansas and meet in Missouri. Hopefully, John, next time we'll find a place on the west side of the state line. But I have just a few very brief remarks. I know we're running a little behind, but today we celebrate, among other things, the 45th anniversary of Legal Aid of Kansas. And Marilyn Harp has been working at Legal Aid of Kansas for 42 of those 45 years. Where's Marilyn? I know she's been. There she is. Marilyn's retiring at this year end as the executive director, where she's been for 17 years. But I don't think it's a coincidence that with her leadership, both Senators Moran and Roger Marshall are very strongly supportive of legal aid. Roger Marshall's a physician, but he has signed the Dear Colleague letter at the Senate, which means he's one of about 5 or 6 Republican senators to support fully funding legal services. And he came and made a visit to the Kansas City, Kansas office about 6 months ago, where he saw firsthand the amazing work that the attorneys are doing there. And he, following that, ordered his staff in Kansas to go and visit all of 11 legal aid offices in Kansas so they could hear firsthand what he heard. So it's a powerful statement that when outsiders are informed and fully understand the power of our mission, that they are easily converted to getting on board with what we do. So we have a video that I want to introduce. Jerry Moran is the other U.S. Senator. Jerry Moran chairs the subcommittee on appropriations for legal services. So he's very important to our mission as well. And John Levy called me on Friday and said, Matt, you've got to get a video from Jerry Moran. Now, I think we all know, if we've been watching TV, Jerry's in a re-election campaign right now. He's kind of busy. But Jerry made it happen, so I'm going to tee up this video, and I'll tell you a little bit about Jerry. He served in the United States Senate since 2010. He's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee and serves as lead Republican on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies. And that includes LSC. He's a member of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee and the lead Republican on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Prior to his election in the Senate, Senator Moran served Kansas for 7 terms in the U.S. House, as well as 8 years in the Kansas State Senate. For his political career, he received his law degree in undergraduate from the Jayhawks, University of Kansas. So let's play the video, and then my remarks will be done.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kansas City. We're delighted to have the board of directors of the Legal Services Corporation almost in Kansas, but certainly in Kansas City. And we're very grateful for your interest here. We appreciate Matt Keenan and his involvement with the board and his invitation, I'm sure, for you to join him in his home city. Please know that your work is appreciated. All my life in my profession, I've noticed the importance of equal justice under the law. I know that as a former practicing attorney, and I know that as a member of the United States Senate. And I'm grateful for the efforts that you have undertaken to see that that's more than just a dream, more than just a goal, but working it all the time to try to make certain that it is a reality. And I will do my best as an appropriator to be of assistance in that regard. We recognize the demands for legal services are significant and increasing, and we will work to try to make certain that those resources become more readily available. There are lots of Americans who fall short and through the cracks in our efforts to make certain that they have access to justice in our civil proceedings across the country. I know it in my own law practice from years ago, and I know the value of legal services and the attorneys, the services that they provide. So please know that you're respected and appreciated, and please know that you're appreciated for your continued efforts to make sure no one is left behind as we try to have the uniform opportunity for all to receive justice in the United States court system. Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming to Kansas City, and I hope that your day is a good one here in our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
My name is Father Pius Petrick. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors for Legal Services Corporation. I've been, we're not in Kansas, but I've been through Kansas many times, mostly driving through. I've had the great privilege of being through that great metropolitan area that is known as Parsons, Kansas, in the southeast corner of the state. Although, let's be honest, it is really more culturally Oklahoma. I've got a dear friend from there, so I always tease him with that. And if you're ever down there, the ladies of the library are just wonderful to deal with. I had to get something from the library, and they were great. But one thing when we think about Kansas, if we think about Kansas, other than rainbows and munchkins, what we think about is the people of Kansas. We think about that spirit of the Midwest that is really a part of Kansas. People who love their community, who are practical, who work hard, and who have a great sense of hospitality for others. And I think that if you look at Chief Justice Luchert, who I am pleased to be able to introduce today, you see that in her tenure both on the Supreme Court of Kansas, and especially as Chief Justice. She has made access to justice for the people of Kansas one of the centerpieces of her work as Chief Justice. She has worked in leveraging web-based forums to promote access to the courts. She's updated the state's rules of conduct to enable increased access to pro bono services. And I will say this, in my time on the board, 12 years, as good of the work that our grantees do, what leverages that, which makes it more effective, are the folks in the state court systems, especially the chief justices, who give that model from the top down about the importance to access to justice. And you have that in Kansas. Chief Justice Luchert said once that access to justice needs to be more than some words that we throw out. It needs to be real. It needs to be meaningful. And I think we have in Kansas the example of a woman who, in her position, has made access to justice for Kansans real and meaningful. And it is my pleasure now to present Chief Justice Marla Luchert to be able to speak to us for a few minutes this afternoon.
And I'll say, in the spirit of transparency, what I just whispered to, thank you for that kind introduction. I really appreciate it. And welcome to near Kansas. So you really are not very far from Kansas, and it is a beautiful day. So I invite you at a break to just take a walk to the west for really just a few blocks, and you will see a sign that says State Line. And you can enjoy that nice walk and get a sense. I think you'll immediately notice a lightening of the air and a freshness of the breath. And I am teasing my Missouri friends, but yes, no, we really do welcome you, and are so pleased to have you here. It is really an honor to be able to be part of the group that is hosting you as you celebrate the 50th anniversary and the 45th anniversary for our state LSC. We are very proud of our Legal Services Corporation in Kansas and the incredible work that it does. We, as a judicial branch, are very, very lucky to have a strong working relationship with Marilyn and all of her staff people in all of the offices across our state. I feel that it is a partnership that helps move us forward strongly in our access to justice. Justice Thurgood Marshall said that mere access to the courthouse doors does not by itself assure a proper functioning of the adversary process. We really learned that maybe too well in the last 2 or 3 years, that at times when access to justice was really very difficult because of COVID and health restrictions that were placed on. But I think, if anything, it maybe heightened an awareness for all of us that even when the courthouse doors were open, we were really falling far below the standard that we should have upheld. And we as a group, the Kansas Supreme Court and our Office of Judicial Administration, and the judges who help support those efforts, I think very much and very quickly embraced that we needed to respond and to act and to make change. And as we were embracing technology to bring in hearings and other things, we were able to also embrace technology so that even though there might be more limited access to the courthouse, or eventually even when we flung those doors wide open again, that we would be sure that there was a proper functioning of the system so that we were truly doing what our mission statement says, which is to provide equal access, equal, fair, and timely justice to everyone, not just some, but to everyone, as has been so well said today. I want to tell you just a little bit about the priority statements that we have made as a court, because I think it tells you something about many of the issues that you are talking about. We have said in our plan of prioritizing access to justice that we recognize that the court process is intimidating to the average person. We have said that is especially true for the unrepresented, for disabled individuals, for those for whom their understanding of English is limited. We have said that we understand that fees and fines fitting into your next program can be unnecessarily burdensome to those who are indigent, and they prevent access to needed court services. And we have said that rural Kansans face geographic barriers. We are dedicated to exploring ways in which we can deal with those, eliminate or mitigate those problems, and all others that create a barrier. To just give you a little bit of a personal perspective, I want to step back to the first few days of my career. As we often say, the ink had hardly dry. It was hardly dry on my license to practice law when I was given my first referral from our local legal aid office under a program of pro bono service. My very first client on my very, very own, without a partner or another associate helping me, was a woman named Linda. Linda was needing domestic relations services. She had been in an abusive relationship, for not only herself but her children. Her husband had left her. No money, no car. She had no job. She had no food. And she had no housing. She had 2 very small children. While she was extremely bright and capable, and as life would prove to me later, a very hard worker and with an entrepreneurial spirit, she had no job training at that point in her life. She really was very overwhelmed. She went to the legal aid office, and with that sense of overwhelm, being just not knowing really where next to turn. And there she found attorneys and intake workers who helped her understand, we'll get you help. And I was fortunate to get that call to be the person who was asked to help Linda. So I marshaled her through with the legal help that she needed to deal with some of those problems. I met a woman who was downtrodden and fatigued, who felt little hope. By the end of that process, because of the support legal aid had given her and me as a new attorney, because I was reaching out to them, saying, okay, what do I do here? Why do I need to do that? How can I do this? That type of thing. Linda had that spark of hope in her eyes as she left that system. I kind of lost track of Linda for a while, but then ran into her because she now tells me that the thought that we all believed in her and that we all wanted to reach out and help her at the lowest point for her in her life gave her that sense, that really a sense of empowerment. It was more than just the legal help. It was that sense that gave her some feeling of self-worth and that people valued and wanted to help her. That process helped her gain control of her life. It helped her gain control of her children's lives. It took them away from a violent situation, and it granted them the dignity that they needed at the point that they most needed that sense of dignity. I know that's not a unique story to you. You know that happens hundreds and thousands of times in legal services officers across the country every day. But I value that because I really started my career with that. And I feel that we need to be sure that happens to every Linda in every place in our country. And I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate what Legal Services does in our community and our places, and the way they have supported us in making the structural changes that we needed to make where we had rules that were impediments. The Rule 606.5 that as mentioned in the materials today. In addition, other rules that helped us have our judges feel freer to provide assistance. We were able to really bring about some changes to statutes, to programs, to resources, often at the prodding of Marilyn Harb, who would say, "Why don't you do this? Why haven't you done this? You really should have done that. Come on, get with it." And we are now growing with I think what will become even a more robust access to justice program. But we have had an access to justice committee. We've got Marilyn has served on that, maybe since for day one, I believe. We have 3 judges who are with us today who have led that effort at various points, and so wanted them to be a part of this today. Martha Kaufman will be receiving your recognition, and she was a staff person who was a key to our access to justice for many years. We now have Sarah Hoskinson, who's over here as our access to justice chair. But as I've mentioned, we are very committed to all of that. And with the pandemic, we did start a protection from abuse portal where people can go online and fill out all of the necessary paperwork. We now have it available in Spanish as well. It was really a pandemic response, and the judge who has really got all of that started, Judge Kevin O'Grady, is here. Judge O'Grady recently received a national award from the National Center for State Courts for his work in access to justice. He is our leader in self-help centers around the state, and which we have paired with legal services to provide attorney assistance for us in our help centers. But he really is the person who got that started in our state and became a national leader in that area. But he is also the one who helped conceive of this idea of the portal and link us with the people at the University of Missouri. I will give them the credit, Kansas City, who helped design that portal. Even though it was a pandemic response, we still process over 50% of all protection orders in our state through that portal. And I expect that use to grow and grow and grow. I would love to talk in more detail about all of the incredible ideas and things that we are implementing and doing. But what I really want to leave is a thank you to all of those people in my state that have helped push that. But thanks to Marilyn and all of her staff for their incredible work and support of helping Kansans have that access to justice. And thanks to all of you for being sure that that's happening all across our country. with you at the helm and with your leadership, I am confident that all of the Lindas will someday be able to walk either through that courthouse door or through whatever mechanism we have in the future for dispensing that justice, and that everyone will have the ability to have those barriers lowered or mitigated or removed so that we can ensure that they, like those that have all of the money in the world, are receiving that fair, impartial, and speedy justice. So thank you for all you do.
Chief Justice Lukert, thank you so much for those inspiring words, and more importantly, thank you for your career of leadership and service, for which you will be further recognized later in the program. But now we're going to have a panel on creating opportunity through record sealing, and I'd invite my colleagues for the conversation to join me at the table.
Again, welcome everybody. Our conversation today is about record sealing and the opportunities it creates. This is not only a critical topic, it is a hot topic. Just a few weeks ago, President Biden announced a mass pardon for people convicted of federal marijuana possession because expungement is not available in federal law. But in states like Kansas, there are laws that make expungement broadly available. On November 8th, Missouri voters will vote on the recreational use of marijuana, and the measure calls for expungement of criminal records for involvement for non-violent marijuana offenses. And public data tell us that expungement of their criminal records contributes to the advancement of racial justice and elimination of inequality. For many LSC grantees, expungement, sealing, and other record relief is a major and growing area of practice because these measures help lead to stabilization of clients' families, housing, employment, and overall well-being. Hence the name of our topic, creating opportunity through record sealing. Kansas is a model of this work, and joining me today to discuss this model are Marilyn Harp, who has now been introduced at least 4 or 5 times today, and so I will just say, I'm going to dispense with most of the introduction, that KLS serves more than 30,000 Kansas each day, so 30,000 Lindas each year, I should say, 30,000 Lindas each year. I'm also joined by Joyce Springfield, who is the statewide director of pro bono services for Kansas Legal Services, and by Nick Larkin and Morgan Lawrence, who are both newer members of the KLS team. Morgan and Nick are staff attorneys involved in the statewide expungement program, and they are focusing on assisting individuals with mental health and substance abuse issues in getting their criminal records expunged to achieve independent living. And also with us and next to me is a key KLS project partner and research leader, Renee Dancer. Renee is the Associate Director of Research and Strategic Partnerships at the Access to Justice Lab at Harvard Law School. And Renee conducts rigorous research into improving access to justice and assessing the needs, strengths, and weaknesses of the courts, the justice communities, and users of these systems. And as we'll develop, Renee and her colleagues and other researchers really play a key role for LSC and our grantees. Marilyn, let's get started with some context building. We're talking about expungement of criminal records, and I suspect some members of our audience might be scratching their heads thinking, if LSC is the country's largest funder of civil legal aid for low-income Americans, why are we talking about expungement? And what does KLS do to provide representation and direct assistance to individuals looking to have their criminal records sealed? So tell us about who's eligible for services.
Well, we're fortunate that the definitions that LSC puts in place allow us to step in after the adjudication and do the record sealing. But really, we are a poverty elimination law firm. And one of the chief ways we can eliminate poverty in people's lives is to open up the opportunities that come to them if their criminal records are sealed from the public. Nothing about expungement changes the ability of courts or prosecutors and a whole list of employers to see those records. But we are on the verge, as Justice Lukert was talking about, one of the advances she didn't speak to in particular is a process that we are mere months from a point in Kansas where going onto the court's website can put in a name and see every case, criminal or civil, that's in which that person is a party. And for people with 15-year-old, 30-year-old convictions, that kind of, who are clearly eligible in Kansas for an expungement, that kind of widespread and easy public access is going to deny them jobs and housing and many of the things that would advance their families and their communities if they were able to take advantage of the law that sealed their record.
So when we look at our grantees across the country and we look at what kind of cases they handle, primarily housing, family law, employment, that's sort of the bread and butter of civil legal aid in America. And when we talk about expungement, you know, at first blush, you think about sort of a backward-looking process because it's sealing something that happened in the past. But you know, I would submit that it's really a forward-looking process that opens up opportunities with respect to employment, housing, family issues. Can you elaborate on that?
Ron, you're absolutely right about what research is starting to show us can happen for people if they're able to access the second chance that an expungement has. And we should be clear that although Ron's remarks focus a little bit on the hot topic of marijuana convictions, in Kansas, the opportunities for expungement are really much, much broader than that. So any misdemeanor of any sort can be expunged after 3 years. Most felonies can be expunged after 5 years. And so it's really a very a wide opportunity in Kansas for that. And with that comes the opportunities to not have the landlord fail to renew your lease because they found out that you have an old conviction, not have the bank deny your mortgage application because of something in the distant past, or most recently there were a whole bunch of people who could not qualify for PPP loans, payroll protection plan loans, because they had a 30-year-old conviction, and that was just one of the things written in as a criteria. So there's a part of our population that are just left out of things the rest of us take for granted because of something that the law has said they have the right to seal.
So, as has been mentioned several times today, you've been at Kansas Legal Services for 43 years, which seems impossible, but we'll put that to one side. When did expungement become a thing? I mean, has KLS been doing expungement work for 43 years, or what's been the timeline on it?
Not at all have we been doing it for 43 years. I would say 6 or 7 years ago we did none, although the law hasn't changed. What's changed has been a new prioritization that if we're looking for something that can change people's lives, we're not in a position to, somebody else is fighting for the minimum wage for people. That's not us. But but if we can take some action to help more people qualify for that, for those better jobs, then that's something we can do. And so we now have gone from 0 cases to about 1,000 people a year, either online, either access forms online that we make available, or get direct help from us, or one of our pro bono clinics. So you're going to hear about all those pieces of that. And really, when we think about what we can do to move people out of poverty, it's a pretty light lift compared to many of the other things that might happen. So, I mean, you might say we've taken the easy way out, but in terms of our staff time, but it's a tremendous effect for them.
Well, and that's very impressive. I mean, going from 0 cases in a case category to 1,000 a year, or at least 1,000 people who are accessing the resources, potentially 1,000 Lindas, is really quite impressive. And I will say we've seen a similar trend throughout the country, a great increase in expungement work over the course of the last decade. Joy, as I'm sure you know, ABA's Pro Bono Week is about to start on Sunday, and the Pro Bono Institute, in its survey of pro bono work across the country, has seen a growing interest in doing expungement work, and particularly doing expungement work in light of the tie between expungement and creation of opportunities, and ties between expungement work and diminishing racial injustice. Could you talk about how local pro bono volunteers in Kansas have worked with you on your expungement practice, and why pro bono, or why expungement is a good match for pro bono lawyers?
Thank you. I think it's a good match. First of all, we're having an expungement clinic October 28th during Pro Bono Week in Manhattan, Kansas. And I think it's a good match for attorneys in private practice, because we organize it for a day, or maybe in November we're having one in Leavenworth County for a week. And we have shifts. So it doesn't take a lot of time to change somebody's life. So you can work like a morning shift or afternoon shift, or you can work all day. And also, because of the rule 6.5, it's going to be limited scope. So you don't have to take those contacts back with you in conflicts. If you know there's no conflicts with your firm, you can go forward and help somebody, and you don't have to take a representation to the court. We could just help them fill out their forms, make sure everything is complete. And I think it is like immediate gratification, because you're sitting in front of somebody usually, and you're helping them and talking about their life and getting involved and helping them move forward. And also you make friends, you have fun with other attorneys and other legal staff, and we try to make it fun, easy event, and hope that you come back.
Well, that's great. What's the date and location of your?
Okay, Manhattan, Kansas, October 28th, all day at the Manhattan Public Library. Let me know if you'd like to volunteer. And we're also having a expungement week at Leavenworth County Courthouse, November the 14th through 18th. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. And we have food. I love free food, so we'll have food and drinks, and sometimes in the past we've had events, and we, in a law firm like Pringle or something, will like have a happy hour for us. So.
Well, good deeds and psychic rewards are
Yes.
excellent, but food and drink are often even better inducements. Nick, we've already sort of been talking in general terms about expungement and how that can be life-changing. Can you talk about how your work, what KLS's work has meant for low-income individuals with criminal records? Is there a client story that you could maybe share with us that would sort of bring these concepts to life?
Yeah, sure. So expungements can have a huge effect on individuals that we represent, as well as their families. like it's been mentioned, expungements can open up avenues to employment, housing, and education that aren't available to people with felonies on their current record. And yeah, I can talk about one current client that we have. And for privacy purposes, we'll just call him Bruce. So Bruce was convicted of a drug offense in like the early 2010s, and that landed him on the drug offender registry. And he saw that as a wake-up call. He went through his sentence, and the best way to describe it is that he went through it hurriedly. He was released from confinement and put on probation, and he got released from probation on good behavior. And the probation officer told him that he was just wasting his time and that he could get off early. So Bruce, after that, went right to work, but he re-entered, community without realizing the effect that a felony could have on him and his work and housing. He just found low-paying jobs, and at one point in time, he tried to apply for like a better housing situation and was denied. So that was kind of like a wake-up call. But he did not despair. He continued to work low-paying jobs, and he worked at one long enough where they actually paid for a gastric bypass surgery. So he was putting himself and his family, he's got a wife and an older daughter, into a better financial position, but he was also, in a better, healthier position as well. So he continued to do that, and in late 2021, he heard about our services for expungement, and he made an application. We kind of reviewed it and determined that because he was still on the drug offender registry, that he wouldn't be qualified to have an expungement at that time. However, a few months ago, the Kansas legislature, they amended the Kansas registration law, and it allowed for an exception to people on the drug offender registry. So it gives opportunities to people with who are on the drug offender registry an option to petition for relief from the registry early, because Bruce would have been on the registry till about 2030. And so we looked at our past clients and we saw that Bruce was likely eligible for this new change. So we contacted him and he was immediately on board. We drafted his documents, both his petition for relief from the drug offender registry and expungement petition. So we sent that into the court, and we heard that just this past week that it just got accepted by the judge, signed off on both orders. So in the upcoming weeks, the KBI will remove him from the drug offender registry. His convictions will be removed from public view. So now he can have an opportunity to move into that new apartment complex, a better housing situation, as well as apply for a supervisory role in his company that he works at. So, he'll be in a better financial situation, but it'll also give him personal closure from the life that he lived and the life that he kind of created for himself.
Thanks, Nick. What roughly was the time period between the filing of the petition and the response from the court?
It can take a fair amount of time, especially because this is like a new petition. It took like a month and a half or something. It's a new process, so it took a little bit of time.
Well, I don't know, a month and a half for creating a lifetime of opportunities sounds like
it's a pretty good deal.
Not bad to me, but that's a great story. Thanks. Renee, I'd like to turn to you. LSC is a national funder, accountable to Congress and American taxpayers. And Congress and our board and the taxpayers expect us and our grantees to the extent we can to use data to make decisions both about grant making and about allocation of resources. And your team at the Access to Justice Lab at Harvard conducts research to provide those data, and because they don't just pop out of the woodwork. So could you talk about your involvement in Kansas and how it arose?
We at the Access to Justice Lab use rigorous research to understand what does and what doesn't work to improve access to justice in the legal system. So in Kansas, we're working on an evaluation with KLS, and we're evaluating the expungement process. And you can think of expungement, right, as record clearing broadly throughout the country. So other states obviously have record clearing remedies as well, and other legal services agencies are using are providing assistance with record clearing. But this collaboration arose kind of how the best collaborations arise. We put out there in the legal community that we are interested in investigating these issues, and Marilyn, like she does best, was in the right place to say yes, right? She rose her hand and said, we want to help you with this investigation in Kansas. And so at this point, I think of KLS and Marilyn and the entire team as friends. I've been to Kansas a number of times now that the evaluation is proceeding, but we're really looking forward to helping to understand exactly how expungement in Kansas is serving the Kansas population.
So give us a little more detail. What are you trying to learn, and how are you going about learning it, and what's the status of your work together?
Sure. So ultimately, we're hoping to understand through the use of a randomized control trial the effect of expungement on housing and employment stability. So we just...
Let me interrupt. What's a randomized control?
Sure.
At least you didn't say RCT.
Well, I am actually a lawyer, not a researcher, so by trade at least. So a randomized control trial is when you randomly sort folks into different groups to remove any external factors that may be affecting the outcome, so that you can come to a more precise determination that the intervention that you're studying is the reason for the effect, right? So in this particular randomized control trial, some folks are getting full scope legal services from Kansas Legal Services from the start of their expungement filing through to the end of that need. And so sometimes that's not just the order, right? The KLS has also done great work at making sure those records actually are removed from the locations they're supposed to be removed. And so that can be another extra step. The other group of folks are receiving limited scope services. So it's not like they're getting nothing. And in fact, KLS's limited scope services are quite robust. So KLS has already, prior to the evaluation, had built a self-help tool, because we know that legal services, in fact, we heard from John Levy this morning or this afternoon that there's not enough funding, right, to serve all of the folks in the country that need legal services. So we know that KLS is not able to help everybody that comes to their door. So they had already addressed that issue through this kind of robust guide and file electronic self-help petition. So that is our limited scope services. However, for the purposes of this study, they added on one additional step, which was meeting for a short, brief advice session after folks had finished their petition online, drafting it themselves, to make sure it was legally sufficient, but also to provide them some guidance on what they can expect next, which I think is a huge, huge step and help for people working through the justice system on their own.
So, at least as I understand it, what we're trying to get at is what do you get if you get full service, and what are the results if you get robust self-help assistance? Exactly.
So ultimately, we're trying to understand the effect of expungement on housing and employment stability. We heard through Bruce's story, our Bruce, who is real but fictitious name, that we believe, right, that this expungement opened up opportunities that Bruce otherwise didn't have. So that's what we're hoping to understand, truly the extent of those opportunities that can be opened up. But through the process, because of the way the study is designed, we're also going to have the opportunity to understand the effect of full scope versus limited scope services on the client population, which is a great way to understand resource allocation for legal services in Kansas, but also throughout the country, right? Is it enough to provide robust self-help services and you're still serving generally to to the best extent you can, the population, allowing you to reserve your full scope legal services for other more complex matters? Or is this a complex matter that really needs full scope legal services? And in that instance, if that is in fact the case, do we need to devote more resources to that? And do we need to then allocate more resources to our legal services agencies specifically for those types of cases?
Well, so Marilyn and Renee, we're on the edge of our seats. So what have you seen so far, and have there been any aha moments?
Yeah, so I have so many, but I'm going to condense them, and I'm happy to talk more about this because I don't want to take up all of our time. But I think the biggest aha moment that I have had, or that we have had at the Access to Justice Lab, is truly looking at that success rate between the two groups of folks, the limited scope and the full scope. We knew, and I think we generally understand as a legal community, that providing full scope lawyer assistance to folks is the best solution for most types of cases, and we could probably go to all types of cases, right? We know that people will get better results. But we expected to see a difference, but what we didn't expect to see was the great difference that we are seeing. So we are seeing, and we're still in the midst of the study. All of our folks who are going to participate in this study are in the study, but their cases are some of them still have cases pending. We see a success rate for folks that KLS helps between 65 and 75%. We're seeing consistently in the limited scope group between 12 and 18%. So it's a huge gap. And so it really does tell us, and we really do suspect that while we may suggest that this is an on-paper process, and perhaps that seems less complex, that it actually is an incredibly complex process. And it's not just in Kansas that is the case, right? These are pieces of legislation that are multi-part, often involving subparts, often involving the litigant providing information that has long since been left from their memory and perhaps not easily accessible in the record. So that's not just in Kansas, that's across the US. And so to me, we have to really think about this problem as either providing greater resources for legal services agencies to provide full scope representation for these cases and stop necessarily categorizing things into complex and not complex, and really thinking about complexity as it relates to the person attempting to navigate the system on their own. Or we need to change the law. And I'm not suggesting that those are mutually exclusive either. I mean, we could be doing those in tandem, but I don't see another solution just yet. So I found that to be one of the greatest aha moments. The other one that I will highlight and then let Marilyn have a moment as well is as a part of our data collection, we have a multi-pronged data collection process. We're collecting administrative records from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Labor, the Department of Revenue, the utility companies. These are all to understand employment and housing, both prior to the expungement and after the expungement, if folks are successful in their expungement. But we're also surveying all of our participants on a very regular schedule. So we survey folks every 3 weeks for a period of 2 years as they participate in this evaluation. That's a lot of surveying. And in those questions, we want to hear from participants what they think about their employment, what they think about their housing, what they think about their general well-being, whether or not they feel like this process is deterring them from additional engagement in the justice system, for example. And we have had just an outstanding response rate among both groups. So you might think the folks who are in the limited scope group would feel like they have less incentive to participate, but that is not the case. We have found that this is a particularly motivated population. Folks who are working on clearing their record, that is the population that I'm talking about. And so our response rate has been consistently in the high 80 to 90% rate. So our survey data alone will be so robust, we'll have such important insights about the community of individuals that that need and are attempting to access these services that will be so useful to really develop and deliver these services going forward with an eye towards community need and want.
Wow. I mean, 65% for the fully represented, 4 times roughly, and by my calculation, the positive results of people who are getting pretty robust limited services. Marilyn, any other aha moments for you?
Well, I have 2. One is that Renee's really fun to hang out with, and I've had the pleasure of several of her trips here. But second, she's really challenged me to think about, why does an expungement process need to list the crime when the prosecutor obviously knows what that is? Why does it need to list the date somebody got off probation when the court record's full of that information? I mean, we're making people look up stuff that just takes time and is just a barrier. And that is a statutory requirement, but we could accomplish the same thing much easier. So that's been kind of an aha moment for me, even filling out the form. What if it said, I want an expungement and I think I'm eligible? And that was it.
Yeah, I think throughout the United States, I won't talk about the rest of the world, both at the state government level and at the federal government level, there are forms and processes that are far more complicated than they need to be substantively. And again, exactly as you say, listing dates. We've all had forms where you had to, list every residence you've had in the last 40 years. And we can all picture those places, but what the address was or what the exact dates were, who knows? And that just adds to the complexity. So this is obviously important. It's not only important to Kansas, but it's important to every other jurisdiction that has this sort of expungement or record sealing program. So what are you doing to share your results and make sure that this isn't just a one-off that informs Kansas?
Yeah, so I would certainly be remiss to say, if I didn't say that we hope to use these results to encourage other legal services agencies and other justice system partners, right? We don't just work with legal services agencies where our goal is access to justice. So that's for anyone that's participating in that mission, right? So I would be remiss if I didn't say that we hope to have this evaluation with its great success be an encouragement to other organizations and entities who want to improve access to justice to think about evaluation as you're designing programs and to not just implement a program and assume that it's working just fine without actually evaluating and testing and then iterating, right? The purpose of evaluation is for you to grow and iterate your program so that it is providing the community what the community needs. But how do we get this work out? This is a perfect example of how we discuss and get this information out. So we definitely love to participate in panels like this, but we do a lot of writing, we do a lot of trade conferences, but really what we really enjoy is being at community events where we can actually speak to not just people working in the justice system, but folks who are using the justice system or who need to use the justice system. Because the point is to make sure we're understanding how to make the justice system accessible to everyone. And the only way to know that is to ask people what is causing barriers to their ability to access the system and what kinds of services do they actually need, right? So we love to be in the community talking with community members and also making sure that our research is actionable for them. Now, our purpose of the research is to allow you all an evidence base to really go and then advocate for what you need. But we are also happy to participate by providing the results of research and participate in that advocacy with you.
Morgan, I want to turn to what I think is a very exciting new program that KLS is involved in. It's primarily state-funded expungement for special populations, particularly people with mental health and substance abuse challenges. Can you tell us more about it and who the intended beneficiaries are, and what does that process and your work look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Ron said, and Marilyn kind of mentioned this earlier, we primarily work with people who suffer from mental illnesses, substance abuse disorders, and we work to help them get expungements of their criminal records, and especially for the populations that we work with, it's to help them transition back into the community, as most of the residents or people that we work with are residents of mental health facilities or substance abuse recovery centers. Nick and I, who's right beside me here, are the two attorneys on the project, and we also have two paralegals as well, Amy and Andy. And our project's kind of fun. It's separated into two subcategories. So we have Nick, who works with people who suffer from mental illnesses and have crimes related to that. And then I work with people who suffer from substance abuse disorders and their related crimes, which is usually, drug convictions and things along those lines. And for our process, we pretty much do absolutely everything we can. We walk the clients through the process from start to finish. We draft documents, we represent them in court, and we stick around long enough to make sure that their records are actually removed, which turns out to be kind of fun. In addition to expungements, we also travel to mental health facilities and substance abuse recovery centers around the state to provide trainings on expungements and fair housing to the staff members themselves. And the purpose of that is to make sure that the staff members actually have the knowledge that they need to help their residents get back into the community, so they know what to look for and what's kind of available for their residents. And our project is actually kind of cool in this sense. It also has a preventative aspect as well. So even though we focus on people who live in mental health facilities, substance abuse recovery centers, we also can expand out into the community. So we're working with specialty courts and things like that to provide expungements. So people who may be at risk of going into these facilities don't end up there. We're trying to be kind of that intervention to keep people from reaching that point. And expungements overall is incredibly important. And Marilyn she talked about it a little bit before too. But especially in housing, people with mental illnesses and substance abuse disorders, they are considered disabled under federal and state law. And unfortunately for this group, they experience a lot of stigma just in getting housing, period, without their criminal records even considered. This group, landlords tend to reject them outright because of their illnesses, because of their struggles. And adding criminal records on top of that makes it much worse, and people do struggle with that. And so generally, landlords will use these criminal records as a pretext to discriminate and deny them housing. And so even if they are fully rehabilitated, they're on their treatment plans, they're still going to face problems in the community just to try to get a basic, not privilege, but a basic need is housing. And so that's where we kind of come in. That's been our whole purpose here, is to make sure that we are helping as many people as we can try to get their record expunged, because most of the issues that they at least face with criminal records is decreased. The landlords can no longer see those records. And so people are at least able to get their foot in the door more so than they were before. And this is incredibly significant because finding and maintaining housing is the cornerstone to continue maintaining their sobriety, holding a stable job, adhering to their treatment plans and things like that. So without housing, they're pretty much just kind of destined for failure. And so adding the expungement portion of this, removing their criminal records from view, really sets them up for success in the future.
Well, this is very exciting, and the study we've been talking about is very exciting. We could obviously talk about it for another several hours, but I want to thank Marilyn and Joy and Nick and Morgan and Renee for being here today and for all the work you're doing in this area. It's terrific. Please join me in thanking them. And while we're in the business of thanking people, I'm going to invite our board chair, John Levy, to come up to kick off our award ceremony.
Thank you to our panel and to our Chief Justice here and to Senator Moran. What an extraordinary panel. What a great day we're having here. And of course, this is one of the moments that when we're on the road as a board, this is one of the most important moments in our trip, in our visit to a state program, is to recognize the contributions to pro bono work that the members of our bar provide selflessly across their communities. And as many of we just heard, that next week is National Pro Bono Celebration Week, and this year's theme, Law in Everyday Life. ABA President Deborah Enix Ross explains that goal is to highlight how legal assistance can help low-income and other marginalized individuals in all aspects of life. This, of course, is what LSC grantees and pro bono lawyers do every day, all across the nation. And this afternoon, we recognize 4 of these volunteer heroes for their outstanding contributions to Kansas legal services. And these pro bono service awards reflect LSC's significant commitment to pro bono service, evidenced by our Pro Bono Task Force and our Pro Bono Innovation Fund grants program. Just a month ago, we awarded grants from this program totaling $4.75 million to 15 legal aid organizations across the country. This is the 9th year that Congress has designated funds for LSC's Pro Bono Grants program, and since 2014, we've awarded 121 grants totaling more than $35 million. And these grants support projects offering innovative, replicable solutions to persistent challenges in the current pro bono delivery system. And this year's awards establishing new community partnerships, utilizing technology in innovative ways, better incentivizing private attorneys to volunteer, and increasing efficiency through standardized processes and other initiatives. And as you know, I think you know well, as we work hard to promote pro bono must be supported by properly funded, structured legal aid programs, screening cases, and providing essential services to those volunteer lawyers. Pro bono lawyers working in conjunction with lawyers at LSC-funded organizations across the country have helped tens of thousands of people every year. And in providing such pro bono service, the lawyers fulfill a fundamental responsibility of our profession. As former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor powerfully observed, public service marks the difference between a business and a profession. While a business can afford to focus solely on profits, a profession cannot. It must devote itself first to the community it is responsible to serve. I can imagine no greater duty than fulfilling this obligation, and I can imagine no greater pleasure. And Justice O'Connor's most recent successor, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, notes that pro bono service goes beyond professional obligations to civic duty by supporting the rule of law. The rule of law, she said, to which we are all committed, cannot flourish unless the legal system is fair and open to all. That means that everyone's entitled to have effective representation. Pro bono legal service is both a good skill-building opportunity and a high calling, because our justice system can only function properly if talented lawyers like you, she was talking to the recent graduates at the University of Pennsylvania just a year ago, that she said, you lawyers like you step up and do the work of representing people who do not have the financial means with just as much zeal as the work that is done for paying clients. Well, stepping up is what jurists we're honoring this afternoon are all about. And as I said earlier today, I guess it was last night, the LSC board, well, Matt and others may have different views about this, but we only travel to visit 3 programs a year. So that means we're not going to be back here making pro bono awards very often. In fact, it'll be many, many years. So that makes the awards we are giving today all the more special. And it is now my privilege to ask my colleagues to come up and help recognize the extraordinarily deserving recipients for their service. Thank you very much. And Robert, come on up and we'll give the first award.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's always nice to know how you feel about these topics. You express them with such vigor and commitment and dedication. I'm always inspired after I hear you speak, even though I hear you speak a lot. You know, one of the things that is critically important to what we do is that we empower the next generation, because our time is limited and the window closes. To hear Nick and Morgan talk about what they do and the way they do it as new lawyers tells us that the legal profession is in good hands. So thank you for your participation. Listen, when Father Pius lays hands and introduces you, it is hard to follow. But I've got to follow him in recognizing our Chief Justice. And he said it beautifully. From that part of the country that is practical, that is receptive, that expresses hospitality. I said, my God, the Chief Justice is from Richmond, Virginia. Actually, I am Kansas on the East Coast. and Justice Luckert, one of the things that you said was so important, and it contributes to the activities that you've engaged in as Chief Justice. You talked about removing intimidation and eliminating geographical barriers, both of the things that took place during the COVID crisis were critical to making that happen. Your leadership is an example of strong, compassionate resolve. And we want to honor you for that today. The Chief Justice was appointed by Governor Bill Gross in 2003 and became Chief Justice in 2019. Her role was vital in removing the barriers in providing pro bono services by Kansas lawyers, in modifying the conflict rules under the Rule of Professional Conduct 6.5. You know, that is a way of eliminating that barrier of intimidation, that people can get representation quickly and effectively. And then your continued focus in making sure that Judge O'Grady's contribution was codified and not codified, I guess we codified the rules of professional conduct, but to establish and put in place the portal that allowed people to make sure that domestic violence didn't overtake them, that they had a place to go. And we never realized that while as individuals in a society that had means, we were able to pivot during COVID. But if you are without means and without access, you are absolutely prohibited from finding a way to resolve your conflicts. That leadership is now a national movement. And so Kansas starts a lot of things. One of them is this idea of finding ways for people to improve their lives, gain access to the courts, and resolve their conflicts in a very thoughtful but practical way. And so Chief Justice Luckert, for increasing access to justice in Kansas and for joining us this afternoon, in behalf of all the Lindas, we honor you and ask you to join us at the podium to receive our congratulations and appreciation.
It's often said amongst us who are familiar with the silver-tongued Robert Gray that whoever has to introduce after him drew the short straw. That's me. I'm Lori Mikva, another member of the LSC's Board of Directors. I'm from Chicago, and it's my honor to present our next award to Martha J. Kaufman. Martha retired from her role as General Counsel for the Kansas Office of Judicial Administration in 2020. She spent 30 years of her career working for the state in various roles and now dedicates much of her time to projects that seek to address unmet legal needs. As chair of the Kansas Bar Association's Access to Justice Committee, Martha is the one who spearheaded a change in Kansas Rule of Professional Conduct 6.5, which previously required attorneys working with nonprofit or court programs to do conflict checks and to report those. Now, attorneys working with court-based and legal aid organizations they can provide short-term limited legal services without this obstruction. And we keep hearing today what a game changer this is for Kansas. Additionally, Martha is working to create a self-help center in the 7th Judicial District Courthouse near her home in Douglas County. And her colleagues say that when the center opens, Martha will be the very first attorney in line to volunteer to assist people in accessing the court. She received both her BA and JD from University of Kansas and a master's from the University of Pittsburgh. Must be something wrong with the Kansas program. And it's my pleasure to recognize Martha with this Pro Bono Service Award.
Well, Lori, I think you're great, but I'm glad you drew the short straw. I don't like following Robert either. So my name is John Malcolm. I'm a member of the LSC board. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and it's my privilege to present our next award to Matthew Ellis, who is the Chief Counsel of Koch Company's Public Sector and co-chair of their Pro Bono Committee. Matt holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from Brigham Young University, and he got his Juris Doctorate from the University of Houston Law Center. Graduating, I guess, from Houston, he started out his legal career in Texas, where he worked with the Dallas Volunteer Attorneys Program and the Innocence Project of Texas. In 2012, he moved to Kansas and accepted an in-house role with Koch Industries. When he heard 5 years later that Koch was launching a pro bono initiative, which I assume my friend Mark Holden probably had something to do with that, he jumped at the chance to participate. In partnership with Kansas Legal Services, Koch's attorneys have provided volunteer services for several community legal aid clinics aimed at increasing access to justice for all Kansans, including clinics involving record expungement, which you just heard about through this terrific panel, and also driver's license restoration. As co-chair of Koch's Pro Bono Initiative, Matt has recruited some 30 lawyers, which is the most number of volunteers participating in this sort of program so far. And together, those lawyers expunged 66 cases for 33 clients in Wichita this year. It is my privilege and my honor to present this award to Matt Ellis.
Hi, I'm Abby Kuzma. I'm one of the board members as well. And I just wanted to say that we've been talking about pro bono, and I have personally experienced, as a former executive director of a legal services program, the leveraging impact that pro bono has on a program. And so I just wanted to say it's a privilege for each of us to be here to administer these awards, because they are so important. And so you need to understand how important it is for us to have you participating in the program. It makes all the difference. So today I have the privilege of presenting our last award of the day to Jeffrey Jordan, who is a partner at Fulton Siefken. Jeff chairs the ethics committee at Fulton Siefken, which is Kansas's largest law firm. He also chairs the Wichita Bar Association Ethics and Grievance Committee. Until the recent changes, which we've heard not a lot about here, to Kansas's Rule of Professional Conduct 6.5, the complicated process that lawyers and their firms were required to undergo prior to providing pro bono services in off-site settings often prevented them from being able to volunteer at all. When the state Supreme Court changed the rule on November 29, and Kansas Legal Services needed volunteers for a driver's license restoration clinic in Wichita on December 1, Jeff mobilized immediately to ensure that several associates in his firm could participate. And that kind of immediate action is so important in a program. You've got things ready to go, and having the pro bono attorneys there to participate makes all the difference. Nearly 100 people who sought reinstatement of their driver's licenses received services at the clinic that day, and Jeff's leadership at the Fulton Siefken was instrumental in success of the event. Jeff received his BS from Wichita State University and his JD from the University of Kansas. I'm pleased to present this award to Jeff Jordan. Please join me in a vigorous round of applause for Jeff Jordan and the 3 other award recipients that we have honored today.
We started out the day with John talking about the justice gap. And the first statistic he mentioned, 92% of the problems of low-income Americans receiving no or inadequate assistance. That's quite a sobering statistic. And it's borne out. Imagine the Lindas of America, but without the assistance of Chief Justice Lukert and the rest of you. So the only way we're going to make a dent in that is with leadership and modeling exemplary service. So I want to thank Chief Justice Lukert and Martha and Jeff and Matt for your leadership and your exemplary service. And we look to you for further leadership and service. And thank you again. Thank you all for being here.